thyroid action as well. L-tyrosine, that's an amino acid, and if you're deficient in L-tyrosine, and there are tests your doctor can do, your body won't uptake iodine as well. So many little nuances, and most of it stems with not eating a good diet, and then obviously not eating a good organic diet because the foods aren't too nutritionally there anymore when you're buying it from a standard grocery store. Google sterol stimulate. There's a really cool combination, I know I have at my store that you can get, but that adds the kelp with some homeopathics that can help the body work with itself to stimulate, you know, the action of the thyroid, particularly the conversion of T4 into T3 for weight loss. Homeopathics cause no harm and they can be taken with other medications. Very helpful, been around for a very long time. Mineral deficiencies, so if you have a good multiple vitamin that is absorbing well, you're going to have some zinc and you're going to have some copper in there. And remember, we've talked about prostate and other issues. See, when you're mineral deficient, it causes a lot of problems. So vitamins, minerals, a few added things in there to help support the thyroid, avoiding a few different types of thyroid-slowing foods. We can work on a borderline underactive thyroid. Next, we're going to be moving on to the fitness portion of our show. I want to review with you a really good test, actually that's more effective than blood work, but it in combination with your symptoms can really help your doctor along. We'll be moving on to the fitness portion of our show. Thank you very much. Hi, welcome to the fitness portion of our show. And as promised, I'm going to review something called the Barnes Home Test. Now, how this fits into fitness is that if your thyroid is underactive, you will gain weight. And so, in order to help figure out whether or not thyroid may be a contributing factor to your inability to lose weight, there's this wonderful little test that's been around for a very long time that we can conduct. All right, you hit your alarm goes off, smack, you put the thermometer under your arm. And particularly either a digital thermometer or one of the old-fashioned kind of thermometers is best. We're not talking about forehead, we're not talking about mouth, we're talking about putting it and getting it in there pretty deep under the arm. If you have a regular thermometer, you're going to want to leave that there for about 6 to 10 minutes and just kind of, you know, you're hitting the snooze alarm. About the time the snooze alarm goes off 10 minutes later, you take it out, and for 3 to 5 mornings in a row, you're going to track that body temperature. Now, if your body temperature runs 97.8 or above 97, chances are good you're borderline underactive thyroid. You may not show up in any test, but nonetheless, if you're below 97.8, you should go in and get that full spectrum, full panel testing that I mentioned earlier. If you come out just kind of on the low end of normal, we can supplement and do some other things to help stimulate thyroid output. But that basal test, you take it into your doc along with the symptoms, and then hopefully maybe working with your doc, a good health practitioner, we can help you lose some weight. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to be moving on to the research portion of our show. Thank you. Welcome to the research portion of our show, and with us today is our researcher, Ralph Turchiano.
Thank you for the intro. Well, good news, potentially good news for hepatitis C sufferers. Consider that most, or I should say about 50% of the population does not respond to normal treatments for hepatitis C. Well, what was discovered recently, and this is going to appear in the Journal of Hepatology. So again, this is not like a flaky publication or anything like that where scientific method is not taken seriously. What they discovered was something very interesting about a very simple, natural, non-toxic compound. A compound that's normally found in many of your natural plants, that you should be consuming in your diet anyways. This compound is known as quercetin. What they discovered was this. They couldn't find out why or how hepatitis C and the viruses keep on reproducing in the liver until they discovered two heat shock proteins, particularly two precise ones, heat shock protein 40 and heat shock protein number 70. They discovered that quercetin inhibited the production of these proteins, which in turn prevented the virus from reproducing itself. And this is what they said, quote unquote, since quercetin has been shown to inhibit hepatitis C infection, French said, who's a doctor, a phase 1 clinical trial will soon begin in UCLA. In their words, quercetin is a plant-derived bioflavonoid that is used by some people as a nutritional supplement. Obviously, if you suffer from allergies, chances you probably may be using quercetin already. Laboratory tests show it may have an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties and is being investigated for a wide range of potential health benefits. Currently, the early stage clinical trials tested for quercetin for safety and efficacy against sarcoidosis, asthma, glucose absorption, and obesity and in diabetes. But because quercetin targets cellular proteins rather than viral proteins, there is less likelihood of developing a viral resistance. Proteins cannot change like viral proteins can. And it said basically quercetin may allow for the dissection of the viral life cycle and has potential therapeutic use, reduce virus production with low associated toxicity, actually virtually no toxicity. And since 50% of the population does not respond to your typical ribavirin interferon basically treatments, it holds an incredible amount of promise. And quote unquote, I'm trying to quote because it's about serious stuff, it's life and death, so I want to make sure I don't misquote the researchers. A non-toxic treatment for hepatitis C would be great because our current therapies have significant side effects, and only a certain percentage of the patient population responds, which is really cool because what it's doing, it's veering away from the old philosophy, which you usually hear in pharmacology and medicine when they say the poison makes the dose. Not all medical treatments or drugs should have to be toxic to qualify for that category. Quercetin, a natural bioflavonoid, can be a lifesaver for at least up to 200 to 300 million people which currently have hepatitis C infection, and the half out here that don't respond in the United States to normal treatments. Now, another natural compound, pine bark, often sometimes known as pycnogenol, and this is for people with a very uncomfortable subject called hemorrhoids. And I normally wouldn't bring it up, but the response on pine bark or pycnogenol was phenomenal. What they did was this, and this was at the Anzio University in Italy. They investigated 84 patients suffering from acute hemorrhoids, the type where it bleeds, where you can't move and you can't do anything. And what they discovered is since pycnogenol has antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory, and antithrombotic properties, that it may be beneficial in the case of hemorrhoids. So they're thinking for acute and chronic treatments. So they took 3 groups. They took one treatment group, gave them 300 milligrams of pine bark or pycnogenol per day. The second group, they gave pine bark and pine bark cream. The third group, they gave a placebo. Well, guess what happened? The complication of hemorrhoidal bleeding was completely absent in all the pycnogenol groups, the ones using the cream, the ones taking the capsule. The placebo group still had bleeding 2 weeks after. So that was good, good controlled study. So obviously, even though the placebo group would want the bleeding to go away, from a psychosomatic standpoint, it wasn't happening. Pine bark definitely had efficacy in regards to that. And quote unquote from them, they said, our study suggests that pycnogenol or pine bark may help with all major symptoms. Further studies with pycnogenol are in progressive investigative preventative effects of new attacks and general management of hemorrhoids. Hey, if you got hemorrhoids, it's not toxic, it's not harmful, fairly inexpensive, and allows you to operate throughout the day, start looking at the pine bark and pycnogenol. Otherwise, your pain is your responsibility. Another one, again, a probiotic they discovered for inflammatory bowel disease. Currently, the medications don't work well for this one either. Well, this one, they couldn't quite find out when they were giving people what they call probiotics or acidophilus for inflammatory bowel disease, why it was not working well in all cases. In some cases it would, in some cases it wouldn't. Then in certain cases they would give them lactic acid, and inflammatory bowel disease would get better, but not really significantly better. Well, they discovered this. What the lactic acid was doing when it was beneficial is it was feeding and encouraging the growth of certain other beneficial bacteria or probiotics in the gut, which produce something called butyric acid. Now, butyric acid was really common around the time of your grandparents, the 40s and 50s and 60s, the time when butter was not homogenized, it was not pasteurized, and buttermilk was often used for things like stomach upset and ulcerations. Why? Because it had incredible amounts of butyric acid. What does butyric acid do? Well, when they're looking for people with inflammatory bowel disease, they discovered they were incredibly low in butyric acid. Incredibly low. How does that create a problem? Butyric acid is responsible for controlling inflammation in the gut. So when butyric acid levels were low, inflammation skyrocketed. Henceforth, inflammatory bowel disease. They said, quote unquote, butyric acid has well-known anti-inflammatory effects and able to strengthen intestinal wall cells, making it the ideal agent against IBD. So now we realize that lactic acid is used for growth by certain population of bacteria that produce butyric acid, which could explain why some of the older studies had a positive outcome. Recent trials focusing just on butyric acid producing bacterial strains have been extremely promising, can lead to an entirely new treatment for IBD. So basically, as butyric acid producing bacteria naturally depleted in IBD patients, we need to identify strains that help colonize the gut and basically recommend those to our patients. And this is within the Journal of Medical Microbiology, another well understood publication. So just not being made up or anecdotal. All right, outside of that, I'm going to go in the attack phase with Monsanto. We only have about 2 minutes left, so I want to make sure I specify what's going on here. Basically, in the International Journal of Biological Sciences, a very well-known journal, they did a study in regards to Monsanto's data in effect to genetically modified maize or corn. They said, quote unquote, Monsanto gathered its own crude statistical data after conducting a 90-day study, even though chronic problems can rarely be found after 90 days. Real short study, even though studies of problems are found after that. And concluded that corn was safe for human consumption. Your child's consumption, your consumption, everyone else around your's consumption. The stamp of approval may have been premature. What they did is they found that the genetically modified corn interfered with the detoxification effect of many of the organs, heart, adrenal, spleen, blood cells, everything across those lines. They just basically concluded it had hepatorenal toxicity. Genetically modified corn syrup, everything. The substances have never been part of an integral part of the human and animal diet, and their health consequences for those who consume them. Monsanto said the study that was found that products were poisonous was faulty. Henceforth, the journal came back and said they don't know where Monsanto is coming from in this. This is a very serious mistake because Monsanto is leaving some data out. Well, Monsanto said this in the New York Times. Monsanto should not have to vouch for the safety of biotech foods. Are interested in selling as much of it as possible. It's the FDA's job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Thank you very much for joining our show. Do your research. Thanks again.